is overwhelmed by needs it can't respond to. For example, public safety needs or road maintenance. And there was a study done in Western resource communities years ago that said that a community can respond to a 5% a year change, the government policies and programs, but they can't respond to a 15%. Now, this is just, we've been trying to play around with this. It would take a lot of data gathering and measurement, which we haven't been able to do, but that was one indication that people are thinking about the thresholds at which it becomes too much. So, yes.
Yeah, in terms of the Energy West study, there are limitations on it. I'm not sure how important the federal ownership of land is on the jobs numbers that came out. That would be an important question. Another problem with it, it was for extracting coal as well as gas and oil. So the question that came to me is there anything out there that I can look at that will give me some clue as what's going on? And that Energy West study is one, which is why I was delighted to find Barth's study, which looks at drilling in New York State, vertical wells, not horizontal fracturing, and the information in Pennsylvania, which is hydraulic fracturing. And they all seem to be fairly consistent in that the promise of jobs and is just doesn't show up.
I have I guess, two comments and then a question. First, the Barth study, I've read it, it's a good study, but the employment data is really out of date, and it's from before the real boom started. So there's a caution, and I hope she's updating those figures. On the first question about the overall carbon footprint of gas versus coal, I hope people will look at the Howarth study, Howarth, just Google that, and plus Cornell University, you'll get there. Shows that shale gas is worse than conventional gas, and both are worse than coal or oil in terms of the overall footprint, and obviously more study is needed. Question for Don and for Dr. Christopherson. You both indicate that, or Don, and the idea that planning, is the way to mitigate the ill effects, and Dr. Christopherson, the idea of pacing is the way to mitigate. Do you really think that's possible? Do you think that's realistic? I mean, Don, we've worked on this road law. Just that's one piece of it. How many municipalities in Tompkins County? Then you multiply by all the counties, et cetera. How realistic is that? Is that just, and then the idea of pacing. I don't know if the industry will tolerate what you're suggesting, Dr. Christopherson. Thanks.
So I'll go first. Want to know if it's realistic? I'm an eternal optimist, but I will say that this requires a lot of hard work. And if we continue, if it's not a high priority and we just push it off and let other things crowded out, then we won't put the energy into it. But this community can do amazing things when it decides that it wants to. And so, yes, the state has given us very little to work with as far as tools, but they haven't closed the door in a lot of places either. And so it's up to us to be creative and to work. And I have to say, I know that Martha, you're on the board for the IDA, and one of the comments I was going to make, and we were talking about multiplier effects. That's one of the things that the TCAD and the IDA make a strong part of their decision processes, is to maximize the multiplier effect of any projects that they work. And so we're doing that in Tompkins County. We have to continue it. And is it realistic? If we want to make this a priority, it is.
I just want to say, I agree, we have no choice, but I don't think it's sufficient.
I think that I agree with you. What I started out thinking was, if this happens and people have put forth their best effort to stop it, and then it comes, then where are we? And the question is how to at least plan and make some decisions. And I think that people have been doing that in surprising ways. Whether the natural gas companies will put up with it, I think that depends on the state taking a stand with regard to the permits. I think that's where the rubber meets the road. If they only permit as many wells as they can monitor, then the pace will get slowed down. That's where I see the brakes being put on, and I think putting the brakes on is really one of the few ways we have to control the negative impacts.
I just want to say I agree totally, and I just not to say we shouldn't plan, but I don't think it's going to solve the problem.
Can I make two quick comments on that? One, the Howarth study looks only at greenhouse gases and finds that gas drilling may be worse than coal. The Howarth and Ingrafe study does not look at the impact on the environment of drilling itself and spills and infrastructure. So that's important to keep in mind as you look at the Howarth and Ingrafe study. It's an important study, but pay attention to its limits because there's more going on. And that's fine.
So we've been told by the library that we are over time. So what we're going to do is, if you, the three of you who are in line, can just make it very, very short, okay?
I was wondering if you were aware of a story that I heard recently about stone quarries, which is obviously a very valuable commodity, and a stone quarry not being paid by the gas companies for such a long time that they actually went bankrupt and then were taken over by the gas company.
No comment.
My question concerns the recovery that the two of you are looking for after the, and then that goes into what you were talking about the nature of the balancing of the economic interests which are now here. If we were rebuilding an automobile plant that would take 2 or 3 years to go from ground to functionality, I could see it in the context that you're talking about. But farming, tourism at this level, sportsmen, bird watchers, winemaking, these are things that take decades to establish. So how, in an area where the infrastructure would be built up, the bust you're talking about, from my understanding, has to do with inflated infrastructure where the people aren't there anymore and nobody can pay for it. So you put that as a burden on reestablishing what this area had developed in the last few decades, and it comes out there's no future.
Tony Serviente, Danby. Perhaps this was mentioned in some of the figures and talk that went by, and forgive me if it was, but it seemed to be absent. And so my perspective has been very recently one of looking at property value impacts, and I've spoken to a number of bankers, realtors, and assessors. And the consensus seems to be that one of two things will happen here if fracking does come. And one is nothing, and the other is a negative impact. There seems to be no projection of a positive impact for property values. So in the economic models and projections, if property value impacts in a negative direction were included, I could imagine that the impact would add a huge number to what we saw. And for most of us, our property, whether it be an acre or 10 or a home or whatever, is not only our single biggest current investment, but it's also what we might be looking toward for our retirement, or what we might leave as our children's inheritance. And so this is a very big issue for some of us that is actually having an impact already. Bankers, some banks are already declining mortgages for properties with surface lease rights. Right. And they have indicated that they might start considering adjacent properties as impacting current properties. So it's not a hypothetical anymore. And so I guess my question is, has any of these things relating to property values been looked at either in Pennsylvania or elsewhere and compared to what we might face here?
This is a time I can do an advertisement for my students. My class this semester workshop is going to be giving a webinar on May 9th, I think 2 o'clock in the afternoon, sponsored by the Community and Regional Development Institute. And one group of the students has actually been looking across shale plays at the property value question, and they've had some really interesting findings. One of which is that the property values go down in the drilling area itself in the counties. But there's what they call a Goldilocks effect, where for some communities that are some distance from the drilling within the commuting shed, those values go up. So there's this odd pattern that seems to be occurring in different shale plays where around the drilling it's damaging, but people will move to adjacent middle-class communities and those values will go up. So anyway, they're going to present these results on May 9th at 2 o'clock in a webinar. So
the website is?
it's the Community and Rural Development Institute. But if you go to my website, the Green Choices one, we'll post it there too.
Just a brief comment. This is an interesting example of how averages and individuals can come to very different conclusions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you happen to be living where the property level falls out from underneath you, you'll have a different outcome than if you're living in the neighboring community where the property level goes up. And that doesn't show up in the average.
Thank you very much. This has been wonderful.
You're welcome.